Hey everyone, welcome back. It's been quite a long time since I posted any videos, not because haven't been playing, although I haven't had as much time in the past year or so to indulge in this hobby, but I was excited when Pacific War was coming out, and as soon as I opened the box, did all the clipping of the counters, went through the materials, got started on engagement scenarios. I just was excited to post something, especially since there have been so many unboxing videos, and we have plenty of videos to watch to see what's inside the box, in case you haven't gotten it yet, which you should. I just wanted to post something that might help people get started, especially in the battle scenarios. The engagement scenarios kind of speak for themselves. And one thing I want to note about the engagement scenarios and some of the questions Mark Herman has answered, they're not intended to be fair. So basically, at least several of the ones that I played, they're almost impossible to win or highly improbable from the side that you're playing in those specific scenarios. But it does demonstrate some of the things you have to look for when you're attacking from aircraft carriers, or when you're attacking forces on land, or when you're doing any kind of infantry movement. So it kind of emphasizes some of those rules rather than making the scenario fun to play and replayable, because it's more likely than not, it's either really easy to win, I think, like the Pearl Harbor, or very difficult to win. So go ahead and play those. That's what I did, just to get a little bit better sense of some of the specific rules, and the game flow in that case. But then get as quickly as you can into some battle scenarios, because I think the system really shines there without adding tons of other things that you have to think about as a player. I think eventually I would like to find face-to-face or possibly an online opponent for a campaign scenario, especially, because I think the system is going to shine the most in the campaign scenario. Strategic scenarios, that's for if you've got no other life, maybe, or space to just leave something set up for a long time. But I think the campaign scenarios are within reach. In any case, this is going to be a little bit of rule highlighting. It's not going to be rules heavy in specifics, but as things come up in the game, I'll try to explain the best I can, to the best of my knowledge. I had this original Pacific War way back in the 80s when it first came out, played some of it, had a lot of other games, Avalon Hill Victory games, and just probably didn't give it its due back then. And then I sold off most of my collection, raising a family and getting involved with other things and just getting out of the hobby. Probably in the early 2000s, end of the 90s, early 2000s, and then got back into about 6-7 years ago, when I saw incredible productions that were coming out for game systems and games. Then when I saw the Pacific War was going to be redone, I was one of the first P500 buyers, and I have not regretted it. I've been pretty much involved in playing this the last 2 weeks, or getting ready to play it, punching all the thousands of counters, organizing, and clipping. Already got fairly good organizational for for the tons of counters, 5 trays with some bags of counters that are more readily accessible from baggies. Just a quick overview of the system from battle scenario perspective. There's going to be a set of victory conditions. I'll get into the specifics on Battle of Eastern Solomons, which I'm going to play through. But there's basically 2 parts to, let's go up here, 2 parts to the battle scenario. And you can see the, let's bring it forward here. These 2 charts are going to be important as soon as you get into battle scenarios and then campaign and strategic. The top chart, that's really long. You see the SCBE. All those lines are simply the phases in that system. So engagement scenarios, you're only going to use the colored orange and blue with it, and then skipping the grayed out boxes. And then battle scenarios, which we're going to try, has a lot of grayed out boxes, but there's 2 important ones. And those are the contact phase. Those are the contact phases there. Operational player contact and reaction player contact phase. And you do that once and then get into the battle cycles, and you just simply keep doing the battle cycles until the game ends, which, I don't have the operational end. This is going to be a 21-day operation. The inside numbers there. So I'll have to get an operational marker, operational end on 21. So the battle cycle keeps going until you get to the 21 day. You probably, almost all the time, you're not going to go till 21 days or 28, depending on the operational length, simply because you have to get your ships back into anchorage and deactivate before that time limit happens. Otherwise they count as sunk, and you do not want that to happen. A couple of the scenarios that I played, which actually was kind of a cool effect, I was almost playing to a draw on the US side, and it looked like it was going to be a draw, and then there was a last attack by a Japanese carrier, a carrier attack, and one of my carriers was crippled. So when that happened, I could no longer get back in time. I had enough time if it could move full speed, but since it could only move 1 hex per cycle, battle cycle, it could not make it back to port in order to deactivate, and so therefore it counted as sunk and lost the game just because of that. So it's pretty cool how that works. I like the fact you just can't play, and then the time limit ends and you count up victory points. You have to think even somewhat strategically, even in a battle scenario, and that's pretty cool. Basically in the contact phase that you'll see in the next video, the contact phase will be, in this case, Japanese is an operational player, and it's intercept. You see the intercept down there. When the Japanese player moves, they can move. This is a force, it's not a task force right now, but when it becomes a task force, you can move 2 hexes, And then as soon as it's over the 2 hexes, the reaction player can stop movement at any time. So you could let the Japanese player, in this case, the US player could let the Japanese player move 8 hexes before stopping them. They can stop them if they happen to, they can stop them before that if they discover them in a search. But generally you're going to let them go depending again on what the victory conditions and what the US is trying to do to react to in this case, the Japanese naval movements. You may let them go 6 hexes. The trick is, the caveat, as the operational player moves forward each hex and then say stops, in this case at 5, that's going to be the number of hexes that the reaction player can move. So if you've stopped the Japanese at 5, then the US player can go 5 hexes in its reaction contact phase. There's no combat that happens. It's just movement and maneuvering. I'm not going to go into the details of land movement and air movement. If you wanted to move air units, you can move them twice if you're the operational player. In this case, in the intercept, well, in their contact phase, the reaction player can move their air units once and transfer to another base. Since the days in the operation are very important, one of the things that happens in the contact phase is the gray boxes are when the days move forward. So in this case, if the Japanese have moved 5 days, or 5 hexes, I should say, then you're going to move the day marker 2 spaces because there's 2 gray boxes that they went through. So if that's where they stop, then when the battle cycle begins, you're going to start basically on day 2. Once the battle cycle begins, you'll have to decide on the light condition. I should highlight over here in this phase track. Lighting will be first, and the operational player, in this case in intercept, will get to decide if they want to use their, they get one choice during the battle cycle sequence. And if they use it right away, they can decide to place the lighting marker in any spot that they want. If they choose not to do that, it goes randomly with the die roll. Let's pretend that it went to day PM, and then each time the lighting condition comes up, that box over here, you're going to move 1 space clockwise, and that will be the lighting condition for that particular battle cycle. If the operational player hasn't used their choice yet for lighting condition, they can choose to do that once at any battle cycle they choose. In this case, if they chose to use it, they'd have to move it forward 2 boxes. In some cases, it can be very tactical and tricky using the lighting condition, because you might want to have night conditions so that you're not attacked, or it's harder to find. Maybe you're trying to escape, you've been damaged, and you want to get out of there without being found, maybe it's advantageous for you to put it at night. Or if you want to do some focus on surface to surface battles rather than aircraft carrier battles, then you put it on night. Sometimes it's advantageous to let it go into, once you're at the day AM, if nobody uses, or if the operational player doesn't use their choice advantage, or they've used it already, it does move one into here, and then it's going to be a random roll. So every once in a while you're going to maybe go from, say, day AM, and if you roll a 0-1, you'd actually skip all these and go right to night, which is kind of a cool, possibility. So what I like about this game, you can have some great strategies, but things happen, and just like in real life, and you can't count on certain things happening because of those kind of random events. Strikes are not guaranteed. Finding other ships are not guaranteed. So it really is a wonderful system that can be replayed with the same battle over and over again. Just a quick hit on what happens in battle cycles, and we're going to focus more on naval actions, especially air to naval actions, and some of the airstrikes that would happen with carriers. As you're moving into the battle cycle, you did the lighting. You now have activate or advantage determination, and you do a simple die roll. And in this case, 0 is actually 0. So Japanese would win the advantage, and they would then go into advantage movement. You can move land, air, and naval. You have to move all of one kind before you move the other kind. But you can choose any order you want. You could move all your ships first, and then move your air units if you wanted to. You're not going to do any kind of attacks. It's just movement and searches. Searches happen during the contact phases, and searches happen during the movement, advantage movement, and the disadvantage movement phase. And we'll stop right there, and I'll pick it up after I get back from my route. Okay, I wanted to highlight a few things. Again, I'm not going to dive into rules and go step by step in that way. Again, we'll probably learn more by doing when we get into the scenario itself. But I wanted to highlight a couple things that I discovered as I was playing that's kind of important, that it might be overlooked for some of us. I know I had to change the way I was playing. I had to redo a couple scenarios because I was doing it wrong. The first is the fact that you're given 2 player aids, one that are at the Japanese war screen and the US or Allied. And much of it is similar, but if you take a look at the search tables, this is where I made a mistake. Even if you play solo, you're still going to have to refer to both screens. On the left, you have the Japanese search chart. And as you can see, the basic gist behind this is the farther away you're searching, the less likely you are to actually find anything. And so you can see at the 8 hex distance, you'd have to roll a 0 on one die, and that's obviously 10% chance of success. And as you get closer to a search area, you can get all the way 60% success rate. Although with the pinkish reddish search discovery, you don't know as much about the particular task force that you've discovered. But the main thing I wanted to stress here is that, as you can see, in comparison, Japanese to US or Allied, the long-range air is basically the same. It doesn't matter night or daytime searches. Long-range air, Japanese, Allied, same effects. But where it gets quite a bit different, the Japanese fighter, tactical, or bomber air unit that's searching can go all the way to 6 hexes. Allied only 5. And then when you get to the spotter planes, or I'm sorry, when you get to night, they can actually go out to 2 hexes and have a chance, 10% at 2 hexes, or 20% chance at 1 hex range at night for the Japanese, whereas the Allied side don't even bother searching if it's nighttime with a FT or B air unit. And then with the spotter planes, you can see that's quite a bit of difference too. You can go all the way to 6 hexes with the Japanese spotter planes during the day, and you can only go at 4. And these spotter planes are from ships. As you can see, there's a little plane on that ship in the center, or below the ship. That's a spotter plane. So that ship can search, doesn't have to be an aircraft carrier or a regular plane unit, air unit. But that's quite a bit of difference, and Allied can't even search with spotter planes at night. And there's at 1 hex range, there's a fully 30% chance that a spotter plane would get something with Japanese searches. So make sure you're using the right chart for searching when you're doing the Japanese or Allied side. This is, when I first looked at the chart, I was confused. It might not be intuitive, but once you realize how it's set up, this is all same hex. So say that an air unit was coming into flying into a force to attack, whether it was a land force or a task force. Once they get into that hex, you can make a search for that air unit, and that gives you the odds of, and it's the same for both sides. I'm pretty sure, I don't think I noticed anything different with those 2 sides. So if you're searching for an air unit, regardless of who's searching, it just has to be in the same hex. You have a 60% chance of finding it. Sometimes that doesn't happen. search for air. If you have a couple of naval forces, or if a naval force happens to go into your base hex, then you roll here. And then of course they have the same for night turns. So that's mostly when plane units are flying into a same hex where you have units, then you can search for them. You can't search for air units except in the same hex that you are. And naval units, obviously, if two task force end up in the same hex, there's a possibility for naval combat. We won't get into that right now. So that's a biggie that I missed right away. So Japanese you have to be careful about that, because the Japanese player can find you sooner than, if you're playing Allied, sooner than you can find a Japanese player. The other thing I want to highlight is just taking a look at a plane unit, squadron. This is a naval unit, an Allied naval unit. Let's go back here, get a little bit better light. The numbers represent attack factors. Far left is for anti-air, when you're going air-to-air combat. The 6, the white 6 that's highlighted, that's for anti-naval when you're attacking ships. And the 4 is for when you're attacking land targets, such as air bases, or any kind of base, or ground units, or strafing plane units on the ground. Each of these represents 6 steps automatically. If you've got a plane counter like this, that's 6 steps. If you have 2 hits, I should say, if you've got 2 hits, let's say 3 hits. If you got 3 hits, you're going to put a third marker, remember 3 marker, underneath, okay? That 3 then reduces each of these factors by 3. So now this is 6 minus 3 is 3. 6 minus 3 is 3. 4 minus 3 is 1. So it only has 1 ground attack. And that obviously affects where you're going to roll on when you're attacking various, whether it's air-to-air or naval or land-based. What I was doing wrong, I forgot to really look at those numbers closely, because if you can see, when I first did my first battle scenario, I just forgot. This is a Japanese unit from a carrier, and the 8 is for anti-naval. So I just thought, okay, it's got 6 steps, and then I've got 6 factors. I was just playing too fast and not thinking, but 6 factors, it would be 6 if it was attacking a land unit or base. But it's 8 here, so with 6 steps, it actually is 8 factors when attacking naval, 7 if it was going up against air. So make sure you're looking at these before you subtract for any hits that unit might have. So in this case, when the scenario starts, this particular unit is going to have 2 hits. It starts with 4 steps, but even so, 8 minus 2, it's still going to attack with 6 factors when it attacks any naval units. So make sure you're checking those numbers across depending on what you're attacking. Trying to think of anything else that was obvious misses for me, besides those two things. One thing that Mark Herman has highlighted, and you take a look at the errata, the first issued errata, I think, for March on Pacific War on the GMT site. He wanted to highlight, and this I fell into this trap right away too when I was looking for units and setting up particular scenarios. It might list. I'm gonna open up one of these and just jump to a setup. Well, this happens to be this is the Eastern Solomon setup. Okay, so if you're looking at air units, first of all, the biggest thing to remember when you're taking a look at units for setup, when it's these capital ships, well, any ships really, you have to make sure that you're getting the exact ship number and name. It's easiest when you're going through your counters. Say that I have all my carriers in one tray or counter or slot in the tray, and I know it's good to look at the names, but the names do match up with the numbers. So I just grab really fast CV5, CV6, CV4, 4, 5, 6, boom. Once you pull those out, yes, CV5 is Shokaku, etc. But just look for those numbers. But you do have to make sure that you have those correct ship names and numbers. When it gets into plane units, the most important thing to look for are these numbers here, letters and numbers. So the F is the type of plane. It obviously is carrier based, so you have to, in this case, carrier based planes for the Japanese are white, and they'll usually have a CAD number. But if they're white, that means they can be based on a carrier. Let's pull back, and then if you find the carrier-based planes, okay, make sure it's an F and it's an L2. That's the level quality. 2 is the highest. Ryujo has level 1 on their carrier. That's really the most important thing. Make sure that it's the appropriate carrier or land-based air. In this case, there's some land-based air in Rabaul. They're going to be, let's go over here, the yellow colors. If you've got that, then you just look at the F, T, or B. There's a tactical unit here, level 1. And that's all that's really necessary. In the errata already, he mentioned it, that don't worry about finding kokutai. What he actually did was have historical reference for particular units, squadrons, and formations that were there during this battle. But there are so many possible formations that you could have. He couldn't have fully the number of formations and have them all labeled with the correct name for the entire war. It's already got thousands of counters, and it would get really crazy then. So there are going to be times where you're not even going to bother trying to find 4th kokutai because it doesn't exist. Just make sure you have a land-based T level 1. That's all you have to worry about, and then it has 3 steps on it. I did separate for the Allied side. There's CAG air units that go on carriers. There's also grab US if I can. US tray. Oh, sorry. There's the ASG. So these are all naval air carrier based, and these are all, they're all, I mean, technically these and these FL0, FL0 are going to result in the same type of plane as far as factors and the level, the quality of the unit. But it's nice to be able to use the CAG numbers. I don't look for the, notice that it said on here CAG 3. I don't bother looking for the 3 because that really doesn't matter. So when you're setting up any scenario, just make sure you have the right ship number, because those are different. When you can't, all cruisers are not built the same. So make sure you have the Mogami or the Tone or the Hiei battleship, Kurishima battleship. Those make a difference. But as far as the plane units, just make sure you have the FL2 or the TL1 or whatever the case may be, and that it's naval appropriate or land based appropriate. And that's the main thing you have to remember. It makes setup a lot simpler that way. I think I'm going to pause there and trying to think. One of the thing to talk about is footprint. If you don't have this game and you're wondering how much space do I really need, well, if you're doing the campaign or the strategic scenarios, you're going to need tons of space. But if you don't mind sticking with battle scenarios, this is probably the minimum you're going to need. These two charts here, they're fairly long. I don't have the top one opened up all the way because I don't need to with battle scenarios. You need to follow that phase sequence, second from the bottom. You need to, the bottom chart is even more important because it has so many things that you'll be using quite a bit. The day or the lighting circle. If you get into naval engagements, ship to ship, you're going to need that chart right there, or the range bid chart. You're going to need the naval movement track for the contact phases. That's strictly for the contact phases. So you can keep track of how far the operational player moved in their segment. There's a naval display for naval battles. And the very important track for, I did get this out here. This should be operational end in 21. So that day marker will work around clockwise here. So that the bottom chart you need to have out in one way or the other. It could go on the side if you had room on the side, but you also need, for battle scenarios, I can't imagine, I haven't looked at all of them, but I can't imagine having more than the chart 1, the force display for Japanese, and the force display for the Allied side. And the way I organized my counters was I separated the 1 through 20, or sorry, 1 through 10 task force for both sides. So with these, if you're only using these two charts, you're only going to use up to 10, the first 10, 1 through 10 task force numbers. So I just put those together because that's what I'm going to use the most. And then you can, I guess I mixed, no, I'm looking at the wrong, sorry. Now I mixed these together. I have some of this, the 1 through 20 force counters as well, mixed in, because that's the farthest you'd go, up to the number 20 on each of these charts. So if you have those together, that's basically what you're going to need, so you can grab them really quickly. If you have all those mixed in with the higher numbers, it's a lot harder to find a particular task force or force number, so it makes it much easier. Put all the bases in one bag for Allied, and same thing for Japanese. And then the counters for hits. Those are the big baggies, and I think that's all you need. Besides 5 counter trays, at least the way I did it. I don't mind using that many trays for a game like this because it makes it really easy for setup and putting it back. And if I ever got to do a campaign scenario or have an Outme's strategic scenario, that would make it a lot easier. And then finally, with the setup, this map is the combo map. It uses a little bit of the other map because you have to have this base here, this New Caledonia. And this is pretty much all you need for a number of the battle scenarios. The other maps, the large A and large B map, obviously would take all of this if you had them both out. If you have one of the maps, it's going to take quite a bit of this space. You're going to need to spread out more. But this is kind of the minimum amount of space that you would need to play a number of the battle scenarios. But you definitely need this. These two displays for forces, the combo map, which is not, it's just a sheet you can put in a plexi, and then those two player aid charts, displays for keeping track of turns and whatnot. So that's the minimum. And then I think I will get started with the next video in getting into Eastern Solomons and just kind of going step by step and showing you some of the highlights of how you go about doing things. All right, we'll see you next time.